Okay, hello. My name is John Ennis, curator producer at Journeys in Design. Here we are in our virtual design hub, also known as my living room. And you're joining us for the final Rainbow Cultures chat in the program we've called Chasing Rainbows. So Thursdays have been about Scottish creative practice. Sundays is Your Rainbows on show, but Fridays we're reaching out to countries and cultures other than our own in Scotland. And I'm indebted to the wonderful folk that have contributed so far. Doyen of Design, Mary V. Mullen, exploring storytelling in Ireland. Artist Anu Sahu, exploring spirituality and colour from India. Design activist Rennie Neblett, looking at the eco-politics of Ghana and elsewhere. So, and it's a big thrill for me today to be exploring LGBTQ culture in New York City with Broadway producer Marc Routh. Marc, hello.
Hi there.
Nice to see you again. Listen, you're going to have to indulge me because I was thinking about New York City in general and how lucky I've been to visit on a number of occasions, including to see your good selves. And I just raided my bookshelf and I just thought, gosh, there's so much design iconography associated with your city. We've got Lady Liberty. We've got the skyscrapers, of course. We've got the yellow cab as my monocle guide most recently. And then further in from the guides, we've got these major cultural offerings that have spilt out from New York in relation to LGBTQ culture. Writers, there's Evie White, cultural commentators. Quentin Crisp, of course, a great hero to many from the UK. And the eagle-eyed will have spotted the wonderful Keith Haring and his contribution artistically. Beyond that, I'm actually wearing a pair of rainbow, my lockdown locks are getting in my face, so rainbow laces are heading off. I bought these or contributed to funding collecting for Stonewall, and I'm part of an international runners group. Big shout out to the Front Runners Edinburgh and International Front Runners. But Stonewall Scotland, named of course after the Stonewall Inn in Christopher Street and the start of the gay liberation movement and that first politics of gay culture. And something else that's come to mind since I've been, since I've worked in the area of design and curating, Paolo Antonelli's drawing in 2015 of the rainbow flag representing gay culture as a permanent exhibit in the design collection of MoMA in New York. So a lot there, and we can go further. The August Journal, which is the New Yorker, one of my favorite reads, and this wonderful cover subverting the famous post-war photograph. And then, do you know what? At the heart of it all is so often the beating heart of Times Square and Broadway, which brings us to your good self. And I can't let the opportunity to go by to let people know that they may not know the man, but they almost certainly know his musicals. 7 times Tony Award winner. Marc's produced some Broadway classics, including, I have to forgive me for checking my listing, Oklahoma, The Producers, An American in Paris, Chaplin, A Little Night Music, Gypsy, Legally Blonde, Company, Sweeney Todd, Stomp, The Sound of Music, many, many more, regularly working off-Broadway and in London's West End and UK theatres as well. I mean, I'm taking a slight breath after all that, Marc. How do you have time? How on earth do you have time? Congratulations, it's such an extraordinary resume. Here's a question, let me jump in. Why might there be such a strong link between LGBTQ culture and Broadway theatre?
I think there are a couple of reasons. I think that at the heart of the stories that we tell, I would say the central story is that story of an outsider who wants to be inside, who wants to be loved, who wants to be acknowledged, who wants to be respected. And that's a universal story, but it's a very specific story, I think, for a lot of LGBTQ people, that journey to self-acceptance. And that really is very much the story of many, many Broadway musicals. We have often a central character who tells us in the opening number I want song, basically, that is a structural part of a Broadway musical.
Is that how it's referred to, an I Want song?
Yes, yes, it's literally called the I Want song, as
Okay.
you know, as we craft a show. And that musical number and that explanation is something that everybody can sort of get on board with and relate to, so that there's this journey that we go on. And as we go to the symbolism of the rainbow, and we look to the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, that journey is one of, you know, self-awareness, self-acceptance, and basically trying to get what you want out of life and out of your experiences, and to reach that pot of gold at the end of that rainbow.
Mark, that's a superb little segue into the rainbow cultures. Well done. That's great. And actually, it does make me think of the divert. I mean, if a rainbow represents diverse colors, but one emblem, there's a lot of diversity with the LGBT.
Right, and I think that's the other reason that I think, you know, that there's such an appeal. There's, you know, one of the great things about a Broadway musical is that it is really, for, you know, in my estimation, one of the highest forms of collaboration, because it brings together directors and choreographers and writers and lyricists and composers and set designers and costume designers, and they're all working together to tell the same story, but from very different points of view, from very different specialties. And sometimes there's friction, and sometimes those ideas are at odds. But if it works, in the case of a musical like Hairspray, for instance, it's an amazing collaboration, you know, and we get to see the rainbow of opinion and thought and diversity all reflected on stage. And in this case, the whole really is greater than the sum of its parts. And so that diversity, which I think is exactly what the essence of the rainbow is very much a part of what I think Broadway is.
That was a fascinating list. Set designer, director, choreographer, performers, composer, lyricist. Just hearing that list is just it's a hotbed. A musical is a hotbed of a skill mix, and
it really is. It really
quite
is.
intense at times, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, and you know, you look at a single moment in a Broadway musical, you know, and you look at, well, how can the lighting enhance this moment? How can the sound design enhance this moment? What can the performer do? What can the director bring to it? What can the choreographer bring to it? And it, you know, in those perfect moments that we've all experienced in the theater, it really is the synthesis of all those people working really at the top of their craft to tell that particular part of that particular story, and that's what makes it so incredibly amazing.
I mean, even again, as you're saying that, the best of them for me are this sort of collection of moments, and you can do just as you've said. You can think of what can stay with me are moments within productions, and you think, "Wow, that was knockout." Did you see the bit that bang? And suddenly, you know, you're back there in the theater, thinking and hearing it again and singing along. Incredible. Yeah. But those competing views, I'm sure you must have had to play ringmaster at times. Diversity brings great collaborative mixing, and as you say, the whole greater than the sum of the parts. But times of challenge and friction.
Of course, of course. You know, it's funny. One of the things that journalists always are interested to do is to participate in observing a rehearsal process. And as a producer, I'm not so interested in that because there are those moments of conflict and tension and disagreement, you know, and that is part of what is the creative.
Just leave
part.
That to them.
Well, exactly, especially in today's world where nothing ever goes away because the internet keeps, you know, all content forever. You know, we don't have the ability to like sort of brush that off and say that happened in the past, but you know, it's always sort of happening.
That's a very interesting reflection. I think that goes, I mean, I was from a medical background. I remember when case notes became from written notes to digital, and they represented things that actually in a written note, they wouldn't be that important, and you'd keep down, you know, someone's, you know, whatever it happens to be. But now, ba-bang, you're digitally presented it in
exactly.
your, so that sort of archive that exists for everyone, for a show, for a person, whatever. It's part of something very overt now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true. It's really interesting. Recently, we produced a show on Broadway called Amélie. And Amélie is based on the French film. It didn't work very well on Broadway, frankly, for lots of reasons. But we had the opportunity to work on it again recently. In the UK, we started at a theater called the Watermill, which is a wonderful theater outside of London. And we were able to work on a new version of the show that is using actor musicians to tell the story. And it's completely reimagined. But the most interesting thing about it is that the way that came to be is that the director, Michael Fentiman, who's an incredibly talented UK director, was able, just because it exists, to look at the footage from the Berkeley production, which was an early version of the show, and the LA production, which was a pre-Broadway version of the show, and then Broadway version of the show. And he was able to look at all of those versions of the show and look at what worked and what didn't work, and then sort of reconfigure it in a way that I think magically made it all work, you know. And that's something that could have never happened, you know, 2 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yeah,
you know?
Amazing. Yeah, it's very interesting. So here we are. You're in a much quieter Broadway. I'm in a much quieter Edinburgh. But I can transport myself to New York. I can transport my walking pace increases. My break in the neck is there every day as I look up all the time. It's a fascinating and vibrant and exciting place to be. I'm sure it's still. In terms of LGBT Q plus culture, of course, it's been there from the word go. We've mentioned Stonewall already, and gay liberation, which brought political freedom and personal joy. But it's also been at the forefront of the HIV and AIDS epidemic.
I mean, we had a terrible, you know, effect from the AIDS crisis in terms of, you know, what happened to Broadway. And it really did, I think there's a generation of artists who are missing, you know, in action because of the people who died and the people we lost. We lost some major creative forces. And it has taken some time for the recovery process to happen. I mean, there was a period in the 80s, you know, when a lot of Broadway theaters were dark, and it was a very different time. Now it's impossible to you know, to get an empty theater. I mean, today there's no problem.
Today, no. But
as I saying here, I'm sitting in my office at the August Wilson Theater where Mean Girls would normally be playing. And
I'm sorry, I should have asked at the start. Tell us again where you were actually.
Yeah, I actually am at my office for the first time in more than 2 months, and
because that's just been lifted in New York.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I think that, you know, things are about to come back to some version of something, you know. So, but in any case, I'm here, you know, sitting in my conference room and alone. There's nobody else.
On Broadway.
On Broadway, yeah, at the August Wilson Theater, which, like I said, would be normally I would be hearing the music perhaps from the theater, from the show playing if this was a Wednesday afternoon. And you know, and the street would be vibrant because, you know, we would all be getting ready for the evening's performances. And of course, it's just very quiet now.
There was one production that emerged from the HIV crisis, which you really were very intimately involved with, and it's one of the most profound pieces of theatre that I've seen in my lifetime, and that's Angels in America, the Tony Kushner play. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, Angels in America was at that moment almost ripped from the pages, ripped from the headlines in terms of the story that we were trying to tell. And you know, Tony Kushner, who wrote the piece, is, you know, just brilliantly able to synthesize sort of what was happening, but in the most wonderful way. I mean, the characters are just so rich. When the show originally opened, it was only part one, which is called Millennium Approaches. The second part.
You were there at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my partners were, you know, producing the show, and I was a more junior person during that time. When the revival came around recently, and we were able to bring the National Theatre production here to Broadway, I was a full producer because it's many years later. But But in both cases, I think, the first, because it was really reflecting the moment in time. And now, as we can look back and see sort of how much has changed and how much has not changed, the relevancy of that play and sort of the import of it, it's still an amazing piece of theater. It won the Tony Award 2 years in a row, because part one opened one year and part two opened the next year. And then when it was revived, it won the Best Revival Tony Award as well. So, and I think, it's a monumental piece of theater. It really is.
It's monumental. It absolutely is. I saw the first production I saw was actually Ian Reiki directing the 784 production in Scotland. And I saw that in Edinburgh. And I was lucky enough to see the National Theatre revival that you've mentioned, that then you took to New York, and it's a monument. It's monumental. It is. That's a totally appropriate word for it. On a different spectrum, but another international hit, one of my favorite all-time musicals, which is Hairspray, and an extraordinary, exuberant dance. I mean, it's a glorious pot of joy, isn't it?
Hairspray is a joyous.
For those who don't know it, can you tell us a little bit about the plot, and maybe give us a little insight from your point of view producing it, and from the LGBTQ point of view?
Sure. I think that one of the reasons why Hairspray is so universal is because it's the story of this little fat girl who wants to be accepted, and that is such there's a little fat girl inside all of us, I think, and especially maybe in the LGBT community, that we look for acceptance, we look for an understanding of our place in the world and who we are, and want to understand and sort of make sense of all of that. And so Tracy Turnblad, the star, the main character, her journey is a universal journey, and then surrounding that, because it springs from the film by John Waters, and he
amazing,
has wonderful
divine and
quality to him. He was able to take this performer Divine, who is a major staple of his films, and infuse that with as the character of the mother. It's just sort of brilliant, because by simply casting a man as a woman and never acknowledging that it's a man playing a woman, the relationship between her and her husband becomes very, very subversive, but on a sort of almost secretive level.
It's really not a reference point. It's just what it is.
Exactly. And the casting for Broadway with Harvey Fierstein, who is a gay icon, and and is sort of so brilliant, was perfection. It just, there wasn't anybody sort of better to do that part, or to originate that part. And Harvey actually contributed some of the dialogue even to the show. So there are a few lines that are Harvey's that we kept.
I saw Harvey Fierstein in Cabaret here in a small performance in Edinburgh, and I can't imagine he wouldn't contribute something.
That's right. I'm sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, he's a very, very talented writer, of course, having written another major, gay play, Torch Song Trilogy, as well as writing the book for Kinky Boots, and
Oh, I know that. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so he's a great, great writer. So yes, it's very, very hard for him to separate writing and performing, and we welcomed it. I mean, it was one of those things where we welcomed it and we acknowledged it. He really helped create that show. But it's gone on to be played by Michael Ball in London, and lots of other brilliant performers as well. So it's a show that can work well, and I'm very excited now that we're working on bringing it back to Broadway. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Got a scoop. Fantastic.
Yeah,
so that's part of what's clicking on in your head then, and
absolutely. I mean, one thing about this moment in history is that because Broadway has come to a standstill, it gives us a little bit of time to reflect and to plan for the future. And Hairspray is one of those shows. We've been talking about reviving it for a while, and we sort of got a little hung up on casting and worrying about the fact that we needed some major star power. But I think that now, at this moment in history, we just all feel like we need a shot of joy.
We need a big bucket of joy, and that's that musical.
Exactly. It's a musical that you'll be very hard pressed to find the ballad in that show, because all of the numbers are sort of this wonderful, joyful up-tempo exuberance, which is very, very much musical with a capital K, which is, the kind of musical comedy that I love. So I'm really, really thrilled.
I mean, it's such a great show, and thank you for giving us the joy of anticipation. Listen, we're almost up with our time. Perhaps I can take you back to where we first met, which in fact is in Edinburgh during the festivals here, 2018 and 2019. You were with your wonderful and super talented husband, Ashi Remer Toledo, who leads Hyphen Hub in New York, which is a stunning offering. Edinburgh's going to be very quiet this year, and we're going to feel that time, and we're going to use that time to reflect and plan ourselves. And in some respects, that's a rare treat. We're so used to doing that time in reflection and planning can be well met.
Yeah.
So the future. You've been kind enough to let us know that Hairspray may be revival, or anything else bubbling around.
Well, yeah. I mean, the other show that I'm super excited about is Back to the Future. We actually rehearsed the show, and we started performances in Manchester. We actually got through
in Manchester, UK.
Manchester, UK. Yeah, exactly. And we opened on, I think, Wednesday, and then 2 days later, the transportation between the UK and the US was shut down. So we were able to actually get the show open, and it came out really, really well. I'm super, super happy with it. And now we're looking to open in the West End next summer. So not this summer, but the following summer. So
fantastic.
Yeah, it's got great special effects, but it's also got some great music. It's written by the writers of the original films, so the music and the dialogue, and directed by my pal John Rando, who's directed many shows for me in the past. So I'm really, really thrilled to bring that to the West End, and then of course we'll bring it to Broadway after that.
Fantastic. Well, look, great news. Very kind of you to break off and spend some time chatting. I can't wait to the day where I'll be able to get back to Broadway and you'll be able to get back to Edinburgh, and we can see each other face to face. Mark, Thank you so much. Give my best to Asher, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.